Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1981. We're going to be taking a look at Journey and they're going to be performing Don't Stop Believin. And this is one of those videos that is going to be interactive because unfortunately it's been blocked on copyrights. So you guys know the drill. The link is going to be in the description below and I'll also pin it to the top of the comments so you guys can click on that. You can watch the video and then come back here for the analysis and I'll see you guys in the comment section. I'm just going to jump in here. As you can already tell from my hair that this is right up my street in terms of the band, the song, and the singer, Steve Perry. Steve Perry is one of those legendary rock vocalists having that seemingly effortless range in terms of taking it right from the bottom all the way to the top, keeping the consistent tone all the way through. And this is something that confuses not only non-singers, but singers alike, because they'll watch a guy like Steve sing, and they'll hear the notes that he's singing, but then they'll wonder, well, what part of his voice is he using? Is he in chest voice? Is he in mixed voice? Is he in head voice? Is he in falsetto? How does he make these sounds? Because you can't hear any breaks, and you don't know when he's in head voice and chest voice, because it all sounds the same. And that is the beauty about Steve Perry's technique as a vocalist, having that ability to just put together one long note all the way from the bottom of the range to the top that is so consistent. You don't really know which part of his voice he's accessing at that time, and he also has the ability to access different notes with different parts of his voice. So if he wants a little bit more air in the sound, he can make it sound more falsetto. He can then connect the chords if he wants to get more of a head voice sound, and if he wants to put a little bit more body into it, then he can use chest. But if he wants to, he can just have the same tone from bottom to top. I want to bring up a point about Steve's vocals and why Journey songs are so difficult to sing, especially for guys, and just to make a distinction between range and pitch. These are the two things that get confused all the time. So when people talk about Steve's singing, his vocal ability, they say he's got such a wide range, he's got such a great range because of the height that he's singing at in terms of hitting all of those notes right up there in the tenor range and beyond. Having that ability to hit those notes doesn't necessarily mean you have a wide range, but it's something that people refer to when they hear a guy singing high. They'll say that he's got a big range. So one of the reasons that this is so difficult to sing for guys is because of the pitch that we're starting at, but not only that, the killer is the amount of time we spend at these pitches. We're talking about an F4, G4, A4, even getting up to B4, C5, C sharp 5 as well. So all in that tenor range. Get out your guitars on your high E string. That's where all these notes can be found. And it is constantly up there in terms of around G4, A4. Just constant notes all the time, relentlessly. What happens in a lot of other compositions is that you might have a high note that is around a G4 or an A4, but then when you get back into a verse, you'll drop down almost an octave sometimes for that dramatic change, so you can relax a little bit more into the vocal of the verse, and then the high note is going to be in the chorus again. Whereas here, as I said, it's consistent. The whole song is at that pitch where a lot of guys would have as their high note. The problem that a lot of vocalists find is that they are trying to sing Steve Perry vocals without Steve Perry's voice. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but what I'm referring to is where Steve talks, where his vocals naturally sit. Because, for example, in the intro, when Steve is talking to the crowd, he actually hits between a G4 and an A4, so a G sharp, around there. It's not an exact pitch, but his vocal talking is hitting that pitch. That would be a high note for any guy, they would be reaching up there to try and hit that note. Whereas Steve, when he's addressing the crowd, he's not singing, but he's talking, hitting a note that other guys would be really reaching for who have got a low speaking voice. And this is the other thing, that Steve hasn't got a baritone speaking voice. He's not way down there all the time talking like this and then suddenly jumps into singing and it sounds like a totally different guy. You've got that relevance of his talking voice to his singing voice because that's where his range sits. And if it didn't sit there and he spoke a couple of octaves lower, it wouldn't connect to the audience because he's singing in a range that is so comfortable where he speaks. That's where you get the connection because he is singing with his true voice. He's not putting it on. He just had such a standalone sound to his voice because of his range of where it sat. Not necessarily the fact that he had a 6-octave range. I think only 2 or 3 octaves you'll find Steve singing in terms of that range that he covers, but it sounds so unique because of where his range is placed in pitch. I said that we put the technical aspects to Steve singing to the side, but let's bring one of those into the spotlight because vowel modifications is something that Steve does, but I get the impression that he does them subconsciously. He's not thinking about changing his vowels as he ascends in pitch. It's something that I'm sure people have studied Steve's singing and his ability, and they've noticed the way that the vowels change and what he does to them in order to sing higher up in his range without any stress or any unnecessary effort. It is really efficient the way that Steve uses his vocal cords. So, having said that, if you listen to the word boulevard in the verse, it's changed by Steve to barlevard. And that is just something that, like I said, is a natural modification of the vowel that Steve probably most likely just does, but other guys that aren't using their vocal cords as efficiently as Steve does will notice that and start to take these little techniques and things that Steve does in order to improve their own singing, because there are plenty of vocalists out there who look at the top singers and take what they do naturally and try and inject that into their own singing to make their singing even better and even more efficient. Another thing about this live performance is the interaction with the crowd that Steve has so many times throughout the performance, and it's something that made me think about performances nowadays. How much interaction do you get with a singer during a live vocal compared to guys like Steve back in the 80s, where they had that natural ability to nail their vocal live so much that they could interact with the crowd and they weren't fazed? Nowadays, with so many mimed performances, unfortunately, there's not the chance to interact with the crowd because it would sound weird because you wouldn't have the same vocal sound as the vocal that they're then speaking into the microphone, or the mic is off. So it's just not possible. Whereas here, I love the fact it is so live, it is so laid back, and it is so awesome. Let's just mention about Neil Schon as well on guitar. One of those guitarists whose whole mantra and ethos towards playing I really get into because he's got such great technical ability, and starting when he was a teenager playing with Santana, having that background but having all the ability in the world technically, but applying that musically and always playing for the composition and never overplaying. This is a great example. Listen to the solo in Don't Stop Believin', because another thing that I love about Neil's playing is he sprinkles in technique, but then you're left with melody. And this is a great example. Everybody can sing the solo to Don't Stop Believin', and that is what it's all about. It's just that serving the song, the composition, rather than serving your own ego. Even with that intro lead, it's a great example of Neil sprinkling in top technique, because unless you've played through this, you won't know how tricky and deceptively difficult it is to nail this lead in the intro, because in this particular live version, Neil is applying some of that palm mute to the run as well, and it's just 4 notes, and you think that that would just be easy, but when you get to this speed that Neil plays it at, the technicalities of getting that all clean, getting it nice and concise, it is a lot easier said than done. It takes a hell of a lot of practice, but breaking down the composition, the lead guitar playing, the lead vocal, the rhythm section, there is so much that would take so long to explain, and it's the reason why this song and Journey as a band are so popular and were so popular, because of these top level elements that all came together to not only give you great technical playing on stage, being able to reproduce it live, but great compositions as well, and this is a shining example of that. But we're going to be getting back into the video. We can check out Neil's solo, and we'll resume the analysis at the end. And there we have it. The thing about Steve vocally is that when he sings a track like this live, normally everybody would be looking out for if the vocalist can even do it live, because it's so difficult to sing. But Steve not only sings it like the record, he sings it arguably better than the record, throwing in little ad-libs that aren't on that original, but are still so impressive, the ease at which he just throws it in there off the cuff. By the way, who else was shocked when Iggy Pop jumped out of nowhere to look you in the face for the classic rock playlist? But anyway, talking about the solo that Neil lays down on this track in the studio as well as live, how many other players would have played something that didn't suit the track, or would have tried to throw in more technique than Neil does? And it just goes back to that point that I mentioned earlier. I'm really into the way that Neil composes his solos with that overall vision of the composition, and not trying to show off a technique that he's learned or how fast he can play. Like I said, he sprinkles it in there. But even live, you might have noticed right at the end of the solo, there is a tap in there that Neil's throwing in, because on the studio version, the higher part of the guitar that harmonizes with the end line is an overdub. So he would need 2 guitars, another guitarist, to play that second line. But obviously live, he doesn't have that, so he taps in that higher note. Another thing is the fact that the band, a 5-piece here, have all got the ability to add in backing vocals, which makes such a difference live. Again, another thing that guys like Neil Schon have got top technical ability at their instrument, but can also sing. It was such a massive part of being in a band in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, being able to supply your own backing harmonies for the lead vocalist, and having that luxury of so many great singers within a band would set you apart from any other band. And that's why everybody tried to sing, and everybody could sing in all the top bands. So many of the top bands had not only one guy that could harmonize, but maybe 2, or a luxury of 3 guys that can all harmonize. So you've got 4 great vocals, and melodically you can take the music to so many different places with that luxury of 3 or 4 vocalists. But we've got that here with Journey, having the ability to add those in behind Steve's already stellar vocal. And by the way, let me just mention Ross Valerie on bass and Steve Smith on drums, because that is where it all starts. That is the foundation for a composition like this. Also, Jonathan Cain playing keys here. That riff in the intro really sets it all off, but the drums and bass, I always mention, is the foundation, super tight the whole way through here, so that everything else can just shine on top of that foundation. This is one of those videos, like I mentioned, it could go on all night. I haven't even broken down any of the composition, because what a composition it is. By the way, there's no such place as South Detroit, and this is one of those things that we don't get to hear it in this version because Steve changes it to Houston, but having that lyrical content in there, as Steve found, sometimes when you are writing a song and writing lyrics, the factual parts of it, like East Detroit or West Detroit, or to a lesser extent, North Detroit, just don't flow vocally. So Steve just put in there South Detroit because it just sounded better vocally in the song. Even though it doesn't exist, I think technically from what I was looking at earlier, that would be classed as Windsor, which is in Canada. There is no South Detroit. Underneath that is Canada. But it just goes to show how, as a lyricist and having that appreciation of not only melody, but the flow of the lyrical content within the composition was something that Steve wanted to have, and he wasn't going to sacrifice that for the point of being factually accurate. A great live performance here that really does highlight the ability level of the whole band, and Steve with the range that he sang in, not necessarily having a really low talking voice and straining to hit these top notes. He could just flow up to those notes considering where his range sat. And it's the reason why so many guys without a lot of vocal training will never be able to sing this because it's not in their range. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!